Poor Code, it seems to be your inescapable fate. To be a clown who ends up being used by someone else. It's almost laughable. Kinda sad, really. Hey, how's it going? In today's video, we're going to be talking about Code and why I believe he is not, in fact, the failed vessel of Isshiki Otsutsuki, and that he's been a pawn in a bigger game the entire time. I also want to use this video as a means of pinpointing where his character will go next in the story, so stick around for that as well. This video will contain spoilers for the manga. You have been warned. With that being said, let's get started. Code is a character who quite often gets caught up in a vortex. The image in chapter 3 of Two Blue Vortex sums up Code's perspective of the world and the characters around him perfectly. He never sees things clearly, and when he is being deceived, he always takes that information at face value without any evidence. Code is a lost soul, thinking he could chase after the Otsutsuki to find purpose in life, to have a vibrant life. But even if he achieved his goal of eating a chakra fruit, he'd still be alone in the universe. Infinite power with no one to share it with almost seems pointless, and I would assume very boring. We don't know too much about Code's origin, and we don't know where he came from, but it's likely very similar to Kawaki's origin story, where he didn't have anyone who truly cared about him in the world. He just so happened to get discovered by Kara and became a tool used for a sinister agenda on behalf of Isshiki Otsutsuki. It's truly a tragedy that these two characters hate each other because ironically they have probably the most in common compared to everyone else in the series. Code is quite literally a darker mirror of Kawaki if he never found the Leaf Village. Whether through Ada's omnipotence, Amado's scheming, and more recently through Jura's passive-aggressive threats, Code always seems to be doing someone else's bidding, a tool that is quickly used and disposed of. In a way, Code mirrors how shinobi were viewed back during the warring period of the original Naruto series. Tools to be used to serve the mission, but whose lives were never prioritized beyond that. Code and Jigen's dynamic reminds me a lot of the dynamic between Orochimaru and Kimimaro back in the original Naruto series. Due to the limitations in their bodies, they were unable to become a vessel for the one most precious to them. Instead, that candidacy went to another who didn't care for their idol's dreams. Code following Jigen makes a lot of sense actually, even though Jigen's Otsutsuki nature would have eventually have led to the death of Code and everyone else, it didn't matter, so long as Code got to see Isshiki's dream come true. Just like in Naruto Part 1, Gaara and Rock Lee's conversation reflects well upon Code in the Boruto series. The more someone reveres another individual, the harder they would fight for them. It's human nature for us to stand up for the things we care about. Code just became attached to the wrong person. Had Code met someone like Naruto instead, he likely would have become a much better person. It was after the fight with Kimimaro that Rock Lee and Gaara also talked a little bit more, and Rock Lee was baffled by the idea of someone would consider a wicked person like Orochimaru precious. And that's when Gaara says that even when you know a person is bad, in life, sometimes it's difficult to overcome solitude, meaning that even being in the presence of a wicked person may be better than being alone. I personally disagree with this notion. I would rather be alone and work on myself and eventually meet the right people, but individuals like Code would not see this as the case. Jigen gave Code power, a purpose, and a goal, turning Code's insignificant life as a street orphan into a person that could take what he wanted with his new abilities. He revered Jigen and all the other Otsutsuki as benevolent gods after that. But just like everything else in Code's life, it was nothing but an illusion. The Otsutsuki are not gods. They are parasites given divine-like abilities. Jigen didn't give him his powers and his life. Code is alive and was given his life's purpose through none other than Amado Sanzu, with Amado using Code to reach his more realistic goals. In chapter 75, we learned Amado had a daughter named Akabe. She was 24 years old prior to her passing. Akabe, according to Amado, had a fatal illness, which cause was completely unknown, and that doctors had essentially given up on around the world since there was essentially nothing that was effective against the disease. Amado, instead of spending the last days with his daughter peacefully, felt that he was smart enough and crafty enough to solve the problem. In his mind, and it was probably due to ego as well, who needs professional doctors and medical ninjutsu specialists who could at least prolong her life when you have a mind like mine that surpasses a majority of the world? And this turned out to be a fatal mistake as Akabe passed away, and yet Amado still persisted in making sure his plan and goal was reached in essentially returning her. If Akabe died, in his mind, it didn't matter since all he would have to do is just create a new body for her, one that's healthier and stronger than her previous one. And it worked. Amado essentially got his daughter back, or so he thought. Delta was born 9 months after Akabe's death. And while she looked like Akabe, had her voice and memories, her personality was nothing like Akabe's. Amado managed to do the impossible and artificially create life, but a soul is something that can never be replicated. It's unique for every single human being. Delta was not Akabe. Delta was a stranger. Amado could have made a choice here. Yes, his original daughter was gone, and no, she could never be replaced. But Amado could have had a second chance at being a father with Delta and become essentially a family with her. He didn't have to be alone, nor did he have to deceive and hurt people. Whether directly or indirectly, all the deaths and problems in the Boruto series is in fact Amado's fault. Amado was supposed to go through all 5 stages of grief. He only went through the denial stage fully. He skipped the anger phase, but I suspect it's likely he still had some suppressed resentment for the world based off of his narration in chapter 75. Amado was in stage 3 of bargaining, and he was actually going to get out of that once he realized that Delta and Akabe were not the same person, and in which case that broke him. He was supposed to go through the depression phase after that, and then finally acceptance and finding peace with the situation. And of course, at his own pace as an individual, because people go through trauma in different ways. But that chance was taken away as Jigen appeared in front of him. He said he could reunite Amado with Akabe under the condition that Amado helped Jigen meet his own goals. Amado quite literally made a deal with the devil to get the desire he wanted most in the world. And instead of going through the 5 stages of grief, Amado returned to the bargaining stage. If he doesn't have a plan A, then plan B would get him his desired outcome. Jigen reflects a lot of malicious individuals in the real world who often exploit other people's vulnerabilities for their own personal gain. And so, presumably for a few years, Jigen and Amado worked closely together and formed the Kara organization. Through this arrangement, Isshiki would get his perfect vessel and Akabe would come back to life. But after working with Jigen for so long, Amado got to know who Jigen, or rather Isshiki, truly was. Realizing he would be deceived, Amado orchestrated a plan to get rid of Isshiki. But the power of the Otsutsuki was not something to take lightly. This was the power to perform miracles, to make the impossible possible. He wasn't going to pass that up. So Isshiki had to go, but his powers, no. Amado decided he would need to keep that. But Amado had to help Isshiki to find the perfect vessel first. Then I believe he used code for the second part of his plan to test a theory. In Boruto chapter 59, Amado decided to talk to Kawaki about restoring his karma seal, but as something he could use purely as a weapon. Ask yourself this: how would Amado know something like that was even possible unless he tested the hypothesis already on someone else with the karma? The way Amado described the concept of the weaponized karma seal always intrigued me. Amado first goes on to say that Isshiki's genetic data is still present within Kawaki's body thanks to the karma extraction process. It's kind of like an installer software on a Windows computer in real life. It contains the program that is needed to download a specific piece of software to your personal computer. Kawaki's body is a vessel or house that holds or contains items within it. For instance, in this case, it would be Isshiki's power. The karma is the door, and Isshiki was the original homeowner of the house. Isshiki and the door were gone, and so was also the access to the house. But Amado could recreate that door for Kawaki's usage only. And when he describes this concept to Sumire, he interestingly enough also brings up code in the conversation as well. He says just like Kawaki, code was also implanted with a karma by Isshiki, though it gives him strength, and Isshiki could not resurrect inside of code with this version of the karma seal. I think Amado was only telling half of the truth. We have to recall that this was almost 30 chapters before Amado revealed anything about Shibai Otsutsuki. He even stated himself that every inner inside of Kara was given some type of piece of Shibai's DNA to awaken Shinjutsu-like abilities. So I don't think it's too far of a stretch to say that he used Shibai's remains for this hypothesis for the white karma seal. It's clear from reading Boruto Part 1 that Isshiki had a very difficult time finding the perfect vessel. That is why he was so insistent in retrieving Kawaki. Nearly all of the other kids in Kara who were experimented on died because they couldn't handle Ishiki's power. They got seizures and then their bodies outright evaporated into nothing. The only other survivor was Code, who retrieved a weaponized karma instead. It's not the fact that Code survived that is strange. It's the timing of his survival. In Boruto chapter 56 of part 1, Kawaki explains to Boruto that Code was the only other person who survived Jigen's karma ritual. Kawaki specifically explained that there were only 2 people left, being him and Code. Kawaki of course managed to survive the experiments due to his compatibility. Kawaki then tells Boruto that he passed out, so he didn't see what happened after the fact that he got the karma seal. And that's important for my next point. Code also managed to survive. He experienced the same effects as the other kids had prior to their deaths, but he managed to get the white karma seal as well. Now ask yourself this. What are the odds that the last 2 kids managed to survive the experiments to get karma? The probability for the perfect vessel was already low, but 2 kids surviving at the same time and both receiving karma seals is virtually impossible. Boruto episode 191 also reenacts Kawaki's flashback, the same flashback in which we saw in chapter 56, only we're seeing this much earlier in the timeline. Jigen activated his karma and began placing Isshiki's essence into the tubes of the children. Jigen, unlike in the manga, verbally expresses in the anime that Kara just needs a single vessel to further their goals. He was never interested in multiple vessels. He only wanted one perfect vessel. Amado verbally stated each time that a failure occurred how many kids were remaining left. Just like in the manga, there were only 2 kids left, which again, we know that it was Code and Kawaki, even though Code wasn't actually shown in this flashback. And just like Kawaki's recollection of the events of chapter 56, he becomes unconscious. He does not see what happens next, however, he becomes Isshiki's vessel. Isshiki achieved his primary goal, and Amado so happened to achieve his goal as well. Amado had a means of accessing Isshiki's power without Isshiki, but Amado is not stupid. He obviously knew Isshiki would eventually be able to resurrect in Kawaki again, so he needed to test out his weaponized karma hypothesis. I believe Jigen was likely going to kill Code once Kawaki obtained the karma seal. Think about it, he had no reason to continue experimenting, and the likelihood of Code surviving anyway was likely low from his perspective. I believe Amado was the one who saved Code's life for his own nefarious purposes in testing out the weaponized karma theory, so he convinced Jigen to keep him alive. After all, would it truly hurt if Jigen, or rather Isshiki, had 3 potential vessels to sacrifice to the Ten Tails? Amado likely stroked Jigen's ego, and Jigen agreed. At this point, I believe after doing research on the karma and messing with Shibai's remains on behalf of the different Kara inners, Amado likely used the properties of Shibai's body to awaken an artificial karma on Code. Jigen's ritual provided the base properties for the karma, and Code likely experienced the side effects but didn't die due to already having Shibai's DNA, thanks to Amado pulling a fast one behind Jigen's back. At face value, Code and Jigen are failed vessels of Isshiki Otsutsuki. So how come Code without limiters is stronger than Jigen? Jigen could even use some of Isshiki's powers, while Code could use none of them. Jigen, of course, had Isshiki as a parasite inside of his mind, but even still with that logic, Jigen should be stronger, but he isn't. And it's to the point where Code had to literally nerf himself to make sure Jigen was his superior. If anything, Code seems to be more of a failed vessel for Shibai Otsutsuki, especially when he has the amplified claws and the claw marks. Taking it back to Boruto chapter 75 of part 1, Naruto asks Amado a valid question. How in the world did he develop such awesome abilities? Amado corrects Naruto by saying he didn't develop anything. Amado admits his limitations as a human being in terms of creativity, that it was something only gods could do, but he was crafty enough to make something that didn't work possible. He simply transplanted DNA from Shibai that already existed within the cyborgs within Kara. So let's briefly talk about the Karma Seal. So the Karma is a seal that alters the owner's genetics with the genetics of the Otsutsuki who gave it to them. The soul of the Otsutsuki also resides within the Karma Seal, as well as the Otsutsuki waiting for the opportunity to fully revive inside of the host. But take the soul out of the equation, and there's no real process for revival anymore, just an artificial key and access to power of the Otsutsuki. Amado used Shibai as the basis for his hypothesis. Shikamaru asked a valid question. Why is Shibai dead? Amado hypothesized that Shibai discarded of his body because he became so powerful that his body, ironically enough, limited him. But that was good enough for Amado for his nefarious purposes. A physical body with traces of power, DNA of the Otsutsuki, and knowledge of the Karma Seal through Isshiki, Shibai was the perfect candidate for Amado's plans. If Isshiki's soul was extinguished, he'd be in the same position as Shibai, a body with power, but no Otsutsuki spirit to intervene. And if you go back to chapter 55 of part 1, Isshiki's ghost appears in front of Code to give him his new purpose and mission. Isshiki says something very out of character to Code. He never talked to Code in this manner at all when he calls Code his most beloved servant. Isshiki has always been polite in terms of personality, even though it's a passive-aggressive type of gesture. But when he was in Jigen's body, he never talked like this to Code. There were plenty of scenes in the anime that also backs up my claim here. Isshiki then explains to Code that his resurrection failed and that he was betrayed by Amado. Just hold that thought for a second. He says that Amado forced Isshiki to resurrect in Jigen. This in turn caused Kawaki's Karma Seal to dissipate, but hear me out. Even though Isshiki couldn't revive in Code's white karma, how was his soul able to reach Code? And if his soul was able to reach Code, that would technically mean that Code's karma is valid enough to have it be dissipated along with the other vessels once Jigen resurrected Isshiki. But Code looks at his Karma Seal and doesn't question anything at all and just sums it up to it just being a dud of a karma, and that's why it doesn't disappear. Isshiki's ghost then says that his legacy in Code will live on through his white Karma Seal, but that makes no sense either. He then tells Code that he needs to inherit the Otsutsuki will and that he cannot allow the Otsutsuki to get snuffed out, which is also very strange, considering that he was also willing to sacrifice Kaguya to the Ten Tails when he arrived on Earth for the first time, and then he was also willing to sacrifice Boruto once Kawaki's karma reached 100%. Then there was the idea of the Otsutsuki being power-hungry creatures. So why on earth would they want someone else to succeed in their place? So before Isshiki's ghost dissipates, Code asks who was responsible for his death. I believe Amado set all of this up. I think he wanted Code to go at odds with the Leaf Village purposefully to gain one, favor in the Leaf Village, and also influence. Everything was going according to his script. To the point when, even when everyone was waiting for Boruto, Naruto, and the rest of the others to arrive back from the village from fighting Isshiki, Amado looks like he's still scheming. I know he was panicking because he wanted Kawaki to be okay, But what if other pieces of his script were also not going according to plan since the others didn't arrive back? So Isshiki's ghost drops the names of Naruto, Sasuke, Kawaki, Boruto, and also Amado's name as well. But here's even more evidence that this wasn't really Ishiki's ghost. It's the fact that one name was left out in particular. Someone who set in motion for Ishiki's death to happen in the first place. Someone Isshiki himself saw escape and live. That being Kashin Koji. Isshiki would have no reason to leave his name off the list, unless it wasn't truly Isshiki. Amado had every intent of sacrificing Koji in his fight with Isshiki. Koji was no longer a part of Amado's script. I believe that the White Karma had a projection of Isshiki following Amado's plan, and from the very beginning, Code was a pawn for Amado to use. He helped Amado every step of the way and didn't even know it. Even in the current events of Two Blue Vortex, Code is still being used by people stronger and smarter than him. Jura has sent Code on a fetch quest to essentially get to Boruto, but more specifically to get to the bigger threat of the Shinju, and that being Kashin Koji and his prescience ability. Code agreed to the terms as of chapter 15 of Two Blue Vortex, but I believe there will be a twist for this. Code is a pawn and is a follower of Will's people who are stronger than himself. I think he will play a key role in fighting against the Shinju eventually. It may seem impossible right now, but a team up between Boruto and Code can happen with a lot of work. Boruto has something Code does not, and that's intel through prescience. Although Code is arrogant and will be hostile, Boruto could easily take him down. He could also tell Code of the different realities that he saw through prescience, that the Shinju have no intent on giving him the chakra fruit and may have killed him in different possible futures. So they may as well form a temporary alliance. What good is trying to get a chakra fruit if you're already dead? Boruto could also reveal other truths to Code, that he and Kawaki switch places and that he's Momoshiki's vessel. Since Kawaki would be getting his limiters removed from courtesy of Amado, then he should have no issues dealing with the current version of Code either, so wouldn't be throwing Kawaki under the bus. While I don't believe Code would accept the fact that they switched place at face value, since that would question his own reality and feelings on the matter, Code could easily spy on Kawaki and notice him using Isshiki's abilities. That would easily confirm to Code that Boruto was telling the truth. Code could also follow Boruto in the same way he once did Jigen, especially if the writers give Code more of a backstory and make him less one-dimensional. Code is not a winner, and he is constantly lost because of the fact that he has followed lies and deceptions in order to find his purpose. I think what will break his cycle of being foolish is when he realizes that he was being deceived by everyone, that his path is a false one. He will not help Boruto because he wants to be a good person. I think he'd rather die being in truth than living a lie.